better roll them dice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't roll them dice. You better roll them dice.
Hello, Matt.
Howdy, Rob.
What are your thoughts on skullduggery? How do you feel about ne'er-do-wells and skulking in the shadows and all sorts of, what's your take on, the low-down underworld type of business?
Well, Rob, I get a lot of shit for this, but in, day-to-day life, I wear a cloak, which, is not exactly acceptable menswear these days, but I find it's very helpful when I need to slink into an alleyway and, open a portal to another dimension or, deposit a ghost in a trap or something like that.
I've had the same problem with my derby hat. People don't like it. They're like, "Why are you wearing that? That looks stupid." And I'm like, "Listen,
children mock us a lot.
I have to tip this down over my eyes when I'm in the shadows, like watching somebody who doesn't want to be watched. You can't do that with a baseball cap. You gotta have a top hat or a derby or, God forbid, a fedora.
Listen, and I don't need a cane, but I carry one, and yes, it does conceal a sword and several poison vials. And yeah, okay. We will admit, the derby hat, the cloak, the cane, teens are a constant problem. You have to avoid large groups of teens. They will mock you. But otherwise, I find that it's a great way to live.
It makes it very challenging to do the sort of subtle, secret, work that you're trying to do with those garments, because the teens are constantly being like, look at this guy. Look at this guy. Peaky Blinders ass fellow over here in the corner. What are you doing, dude? We are obviously. Hi, this is Dungeon Master of None.
I'm Dungeon Master Matt.
And I'm Dungeon Master Rob, and we are talking about Blades in the Dark once again. John Harper has released a new supplement called Deep Cuts, which I am very excited to talk about. It has a lot of
absolute boy has done it again.
This is a great document. It is 115 pages long, which makes it a substantial portion of the length of the original rulebook. So that's really cool. And there's a lot of good stuff in here. There's also, even if you're not a Blades in the Dark player, there's a ton of good stuff to learn from this. So I really enjoyed reading this. I don't have a long-running Blades game, but I run a lot of one-shots whenever I have the opportunity, so I'm excited to integrate this stuff. But there's some really good things in this book. I'm excited about it.
If you're a Blades in the Dark or one of the many Forged in the Dark systems GMs, obviously there's going to be a lot for you in this episode. If you're not, I know of at least two things that, blew my mind for all systems, so stay tuned for those. Great game design and game mastering advice here. And essentially what Deep Cuts is, it's somewhere between Blades in the Dark 1.5 version, but really more like Blades in the Dark Unearthed Arcana. It's a bunch of optional modules for all parts of the game that you can pick and choose from.
Yeah, what he's done here is really cool. He's added some innovations, so like new items, new technology. There's a lot of new factions or expanded factions, and we love factions, but those are critical to running Blades in the Dark, so that makes it especially cool for this. There's a little bit of, well, these are new actually. There's heritages and backgrounds, which expand your character creation a little bit, and then there's some new information about the world that sort of like advances the timeline a little bit. I want to talk about this in a little bit because I think it's cool. And then, like Matt mentioned, there's 4 or 5 new systems or modifications of existing systems, and this is really cool. So it's like exactly like Matt said. This is a bunch of Unearthed Arcanas smashed together. Really well done. There's a lot of things that you can implement without making any changes, and then a few things that if you want to, you could make changes to your game. And it's really cool. It's really cool stuff.
It's an absolutely fascinating design process here, because this is at least the first time I've personally seen a designer explicitly state that they've not only thought about their continuing home games and how they would change the rules to their own game system as they've continued to play, but they've also watched other people play or listened to other people play in actual plays and taken some inspiration from like how people are using their system and being like, okay, let me see if I can come up with a formalization of that. This is actually pretty similar to the way I do things. Let's see if I can come up with an alternate rule for that. And it's so cool.
Yeah, John Harper, I think, is really like a game designer's game designer. Like he really like, I mean, he came out of
comedian's comedian. Yeah,
he came out of the Forge, right? Like, and like has spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I really like Blades in the Dark, and I also like how upfront and straightforward he is about his design process. I learned a lot from that. And even if you're not game designing yourself, if you're just GMing, I think the process is similar, and watching how he makes decisions and how he incorporates feedback is really valuable. So he's got this, and this is my favorite part of the whole book. It's really valuable to me, is he's got this section at the back called Designer's Notes, which is where he goes through his thought process and design process, which is, again, as somebody who's working on his own RPG, who does a lot of design, somebody who runs a lot of games, this is one of the most valuable 5 pages I have ever read. I wish that every designer would share this. I mean, not that they're like keeping it a secret. It's just not usually part of other games' processes. But John Harper has always been upfront about how he works through this and his playtest and design process. So this was my favorite section. This was really, really interesting.
Love it or hate it, and I know people have both opinions about the Forge forums, but it really created a powerful generation of game designers. It's, to me, they're like that, I forget his name, but the men's fashion designer that everyone tries to dunk on Twitter, and then
Die Workwear, Derek.
Die Workwear, yeah.
Is his like, yeah.
The people who came out of the Forge were really molded in such a powerful, in either great or incredibly toxic forum that they can do things that other people cannot.
I mean, we joke about this, but like the forums forged our very finest minds. Like all the funniest people, all the like best posters, but also some of the best comedians were on like Something Awful in like the aughts and early 10s. That's where Drill came out of. Like that's, the forums, for better, for worse, and it is for worse. They are sort of like a crucible of discourse, of discussion. And yeah, just like the Workwear guy, John Harper came out of that with his mind finally honed towards one thing, and one thing in particular. Several things, actually. He's multi-talented, but he is a very good game designer.
All right, enough asides to early aughts forum lore. Let's dive in and sharpen our blades and make a deep cut and get into some of the stuff in this tome, which, by the way, link in the show notes, is only $10 on itch. Well, great value for your money. Let's start with new tech, which is just a great like first introduction to things you can plop into any kind of Victorian steampunky setting.
This is great because we talked in our original review about how unique Blades in the Dark's setting is, how cool Doskvol is. And it's Victorian, but obviously it uses ghost field technology and a mix of, I don't know, I would call it like magitech. It's not like quite steampunk, but it is very steampunky, right. Electric fences and ghost traps and pistons and things. But this, I really find this to be a pretty cool. Harper has iterated on like that tech. He's like, what would come next in sort of like the technological advancement of this world? And so you get things like cameras and very volatile motorcycles and other nifty things. But there's nothing like too super out there, nothing that's going to immediately like break the game, but some really cool new tech for your blades to acquire.
I just personally love the idea of a percussive shotgun that you can blast people back with or knock them down with. It's any gun that you can use to actually open a door which is the coolest thing guns do in action movies, where they shoot the lock. And we all have seen that Mythbusters episode where you can't actually shoot the lock, and it makes me sad. But this is actually a gun that you can blow open doors. So if you steal nothing else from this, add a type of ammunition for the firearms in your campaign that blow open doors or are just like sweep an area and knock everything down.
One of the cooler things, I think, is the Spark Runner rig, which is a full body harness that lets the wearer sort of like skate on the ghost field. So
someone's been watching Jupiter Ascending,
possibly, which lets you like just basically run on air for short distances. Like it's pretty cool. It's something that, as a GM or as a player, you'd probably have to negotiate and not abuse, but it's a cool idea, right? It lets you just sort of like run for a short distance by using these electrospectroplasmic energies. It's cool.
Yeah. I think the meta takeaway is that if you're running any sort of game set in a pseudo-industrial revolution, is that you've got to kind of add some new stuff coming out, because that's the defining thing of an industrial revolution. And when we make games or like present a scenario or a campaign to our players, it's like, here's all the stuff. But, having new stuff is what this is all about. The thing that replaces a bunch of workers, the new technology, the penny farthing that everyone's worried about will cause public disorder and, that Victorian kind of, what if women get bicycles? They'll become rude, and we can't have that. And that's the type of things you want in your game. Cranked up to fantasy or sci-fi 11, of course.
Well, exactly. The Industrial Revolution, for what it was never static. And there's always some newfangled gee whiz thing around the corner. And this ties into sort of like one of the things that this book is doing, which I think is neat, which is it's advancing the sort of like the meta plot or the timeline. And this isn't the first game to do this. Like Shadowrun does this. Well, World of Darkness does this. I like this. It can be divisive, but I don't really like reading like a Forgotten Realms book. And I have the same heroes and the same cities and the same people that I was reading about 30 or 40 years ago. I kind of like the world to...
Despite the meta plot advancing, somehow all your favorites still stick around.
Somehow it has it both ways, right? The meta plot advances, but nothing really changes. So this can be done poorly and this can be done well. Shadowrun honestly kind of does it poorly, but I always liked that they tried. Something new was happening in the world. And especially, like Matt said, for a Victorian or an industrial setting, it's important, right? New technologies are developing, things are changing. And so in this technology section, it mentions a bunch of things that are useful for your blades, like personal items, but also there are now Imperial airships and streetcars and monitor spheres, which are extremely 1984 style projectors, but also listen to everybody, and everybody hates them. And this is, this sort of like the new environment that is cropping up in Doskvol.
Speaking of airships and the next section, which is just a whole boatload of new factions that you can pick and choose from to dump into your Blades in the Dark game. There are, I think, two broad themes as I read it to these new factions. And the first one is the Empire, right? Which is always kind of in the background, but there's lots of hints for it in the original Blades in the Dark. And we're given a ton of new information about the Cold War of the Leviathan Hunters with the, other powerful faction in the game, the increased military presence in Doskvol, things like, the Navy and its airships and stuff like that. And then the other broad theme of factions is a response to industrialization. Lots of proto or pro-union factions. People are like, I've had enough of this eel farming for nothing. What if we did something about this? So those are, I without getting into the other weirdness, which I think is the maybe third other theme. Those are the first two themes I wanted to talk about: the factions, Empire and unions.
There's this. Am I confusing it with one of the many other, Immortal Empire? I forget what it's exactly.
The Immortal Emperor. Yeah.
And the Empire is sort of unchallenged for now, and we'll get to that in a second. But, trying to keep a lid on all of these very powerful internal factions, which is a very, very accurate historical understanding of empire. Like, you have these very powerful Leviathan hunting families, but are also like corporations and financial concerns. You have factions within the military. You have the airships and their captains. You have the ships and their captains. You have the military itself. And then, you have a very large and increasingly organized working class that is gaining political consciousness, forming, organizations to push back on the extreme abuses that they experience. And the empire, I think, you're supposed to be getting the sense that it is increasingly fragile, and, it's trying to regain or hold on to control, but struggling to do so. And some of these internal factions, even if they are theoretically aligned with the empire, are very powerful and could contribute to its eventual like overthrow.
Speaking of industrialization, there's even a hint of, how real life industrialization changed things, which is the formalization of sports that were, originally played by the working class. This was my favorite faction.
Matt knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Ragskulla.
Yeah, it's a street sport, and it you got to carry a ball across a bunch of ropes while skulkers try to knock you down. And apparently, currently it's illegal in Doskvol, but everybody likes it. It's very popular, and so the Ragskullas are trying to get it legalized within. Which Matt's exactly right. Like, this is how many sports developed in the late.
You've got to convince the upper class this will increase manliness.
That's right. You got to get them to play rugby by conjuring the fear of the masculine other taking their women, so that they make their boys play sports in school, and then it can become legal. You want to hear something funny, Matt? Sorry, this is
sure.
An aside. You in like the early days of sports, this like rugby, soccer, cricket, it was, you were encouraged to play like as an upper class, like English gentleman, but it was absolutely frowned upon in every conceivable way to practice. You were not supposed to train. You were not supposed to do any sort of intentional work towards being better. You were just supposed to go out and play. And my brother-in-law plays polo, and he went through a rugby phase. And his family, they've fallen on hard times relatively, but they, have an aristocratic background, and they made fun of him for going on runs in the morning, because that's not what you do. You're just an English gentleman, and you just
strength and conditioning.
No, boo. Anyway, sports, amazing part of this industrial period.
Right. And I mean, the great thing about all of these factions, right? The sport one, right? John Harper's clearly done his history research on the history of sport, right? Sports were often organized by guilds, which were, often proto-unions in industrialized towns, like my old hometown of Pittsburgh. All the sports teams were sponsored by, whatever guild of whatever.
Yeah.
And so the sports is connected to the guilds, the proto-union groups. The proto-union groups are connected to the empire because of the potential destabilization. The empire is connected to these other more mysterious schemes, which I'm sure we'll get into in a second. And again, the great thing about the design of factions in Deep Cuts, but also in the original Blades in the Dark, is that any of these factions are great inspiration for just a story about them as their own. But again, when you play the game, anytime you bring a faction in, you're also going to bring in two other factions as the game progresses, as your players do scores and build heat and rep and consequences play out. So it's just a bigger list to tell more stories, especially if you want to tell a story about revolution against the empire or revolution against fucked up demon whale hunting capitalism or whatever you want.
Yeah, they've also there's a bunch of different, what you would expect factions involved in this period in history. There's a faction of journalists, of newspapermen. There's
the ink rakes.
There's a not so subtly like, Freemason organization, the Foundation. There's a group of sort of like revolutionary scientists, which is pretty cool. Like, all these different forces that were present in the Industrial Revolution and are here in Doskvol organized around their own interests, which align and don't align with others. And then, of course, there's your more mysterious factions, which also have their own relationships to all of these other factions. This was always my favorite part of Blades in the Dark, and it's still extremely well done. I love it.
Yeah, I guess we can't beat around the bush anymore, but John Harper, I think, says in his designer notes, and it's pretty obvious, has been watching some X-Files or X-Files-like TV because...
this is actually the primary plot of Fringe, which is a show
Fringe. Fringe. It's probably Fringe.
Which is very... I like Fringe a lot. I thought it was very good. It it had many X-Files elements. It was not as good as X-Files, but the thing we're talking about here is a parallel world or multiple parallel worlds, and people, specifically people sort of either intentionally or accidentally wandering into the world of Doskvol, and these are called the Strangers. And yeah, where the sort of like the ghost field touches other worlds, that can get thin. I love the idea of thin places. Thin is it's a cool idea, and they can end up in crossing over, and there are increasing numbers of them. Unclear like what they want, if they're motivated, if they're organized, but the Immortal Emperor knows about this and is concerned.
Right. And this is the fun thing about the stuff presented here in Deep Cuts is you could use only a single faction or only a single new technology, or you could use all of it. And, the Immortal Emperor is given, two, like three broad concerns, which is keeping the like crazy unrest in the Empire that's building tamped down and controlled, dealing with the other rival polity here in the world of the Shattered Isles of Dustfall. And then also the bigger threat, the thing that maybe the Immortal Emperor is actually more concerned with, is because he's immortal. He's thinking thousands of years in the future. He's like, wait a second, there's a parallel world that is maybe very different than this world where there's no more sun and, most of the world is uninhabitable. And I got to deal with that one because that's going to be the biggest threat long term. These little rebellions of unionized workers or dock ship captains or unrest among scientists, they don't really pale in comparison to maybe there's a secret cabal of people who have switched places with their doppelgangers and are trying to take control of everything that I've got to deal with. Yeah.
And, either he has gotten this in his head or there was his augurs or whatever has seen that maybe there'll be a conflict in the future. And so he's doing a big arms buildup, but nobody knows why except for him and like a few people close to him. And, one of the most powerful houses in Doskvol, this is one of the other factions, is actually from this other world. They're all strangers.
House Rowan, maybe?
Charles Stross.
Rowan House. Yeah.
Had a really good has a really good novel series called The Merchant Princes, which is kind of based on this. They basically, it's real nerd shit. This family can travel between worlds, and they use it to mostly do like extreme forms of arbitrage and get very rich on like trading like different things back and forth. It's honestly like really like, they're really nerdy but really good novels, but like it's a cool idea. And like, so Rowan House reminds me of that, but like they're trying to like keep this a secret, right? It would not look good if people found out that they were from another world, especially if the Emperor found out. This obviously like immediately opens up tons of interesting hooks and faction conflicts and heists, all sorts of things you can do with this. This is exactly what I want to see from like a meta plot update. Like here's a bunch of new stuff that you can use that doesn't radically, like, you don't have to engage with it necessarily, but it gives you lots and lots of cool things. There are options for like if your players want to be strangers from this other world. It's cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we were saying at the beginning, where this is helpful for another thing. I'm running not a Blades in the Dark campaign, but a Brindlewood Bay campaign, and the Rowan House entry was like, oh, this is like the long-term plan of the people who are doing dark mysteries and opening gates. Is they're like Rowan House. They're from another world where, things are very similar but maybe different, and they need this world for, to do arbitrage, or maybe in their world, the Roman Empire, still rules, and they want to, take over this world as well. Or maybe, they're just getting wealthy. I was like, I've got one more session before I need to finalize this. This is such great inspiration for me. And the great thing about the other world, because this is, it would be, I think, fairly controversial in the canon if we said that Doskvol is an alternate Earth of the 1920s, but that's just one option. And Harper gives us like 5 or 6 really good options that we could build out.
Yeah, exactly.
As we play.
There's a bunch of, he says, here's what the parallel world could be, or here's like where that could be from. Feel free to like make your own decisions about this. It's, he always has a light touch with this. And I like that. He's like, here's, what it is, and here's some options for interpreting it. And I really like that. Anything else you want to say about factions before we move into, there's a couple of like new things that I do want to talk about. I mean, we can talk about the factions all night.
No,
I love the factions, but there's a lot to cover here.
No, there's so many good factions. Rob mentioned the Spark Runners before, Rowan House, the Railjacks, who are building this intercontinental portal train network. There's unions that want to unionize. There's guilds that maybe are slightly against unionization because it threatens their position. They're maybe skilled laborers, or they've already got a place high up in the hierarchy. Military factions. It's a great faction section. Let's move on to the next bit of stuff, which is some extra stuff for character creation.
Yeah, I like this a lot. So there's heritages and backgrounds, and a heritage is exactly what it sounds like. These are just where you're from, basically where your family's from. These can be based on sort of like broadly any region, or they could be by region. You're from, something on Akaros or something on the Dagger Isles, and they're just like a paragraph, but it gives you something to work with, and 3 sort of suggested attributes, 3 suggested skills that you could leverage in certain situations based on your heritage. This to me this is to me perfect because it changes almost nothing about like the power level or dynamics of your character. It just gives you more options, and it helps. I think this was necessary. Blades in the Dark, the rule book is a masterpiece, but it's thin on some things. And I think it was deliberately so because it was trying to not be 10,000 pages long. And so to me, I felt like I wanted to know just a little bit more about some of the regions, some of the backgrounds, character creation stuff, and this
right. Know more about them in a way you could present it to players, because there's information about this, but it's like it's not really for players here. This is for me.
Yes.
You could print off these pages, and again, this is actually one of the optional modules where you don't even have to convert your whole game to this. It's like anyone who wants to pick a heritage and background can. If you don't want to, fine.
Yeah, this would have been. That's exactly right, Matt. This would have been so helpful for my players who did fine, but I think they would have enjoyed having just like a little bit of clarity. You can take a look at the heritages available to Doskvol. You could be someone from the Church of Ecstasy, or the Ironworks Labor, or one of the Radiant Energy Farmers, right? There's only like a sentence about each of these things, but just that helps you sort of like get a handle on both the region and like where your character might fit in. This is top notch to me.
Yeah, background, and then backgrounds are like more like what your character might have done before they, turned to a life of skullduggery and crime or whatever it is your crew does. Yeah, they're super great.
Yeah, the backgrounds are exactly the same. It's just things like you were an academic or you were a naturalist or an engineer, and then you have again 3 skills that you might leverage if the situation calls for it. There's a cool. I like this thing. There's a twist in the background. You can choose a cover, so something that you're pretending to be, or a shield for your criminal activities, and you have a clock that tracks whether or not your cover is blown. Just one easy layer to add of complexity if your players are into it. I think this is a very nice way to good use of the clock system. Clocks go back and forth on. I got to be honest. It's not my favorite part of Blades in the Dark, but some things are great for a clock, and this cover thing is great for a clock.
Speaking of, no wait, this doesn't have anything to do with clocks. What do you want to talk about next? Do you want to talk about defining the nature of the other world, or specific suggestions for how to use that other world for different crews? Whether
let's
you're
talk about
hawkers
this next
or
section.
cult. Yeah.
Specifically, and I just because I like how Harper has framed it. He calls this section catalyst. And so this, to me, says this is the thing that is causing the change in your game, in the world of Doskvol, and he elaborates a bit on the thin places, the fractures, the strangers, the vanished, who are sort of like the inverse of strangers, people from this world who have gone over to the other, the characters who know about this other world. And I really like how he has done this, because he sort of lays out the most important parts to your game and to the sort of the game fiction, and how to work those into your campaign if you want to. And then he has that bit that we talked about, the nature of the other world, with some examples of how it would work.
This is so much more useful than just giving a detailed 30 pages on, as you said, the nature of the other world, is instead to give how to use an other world for each type of crew that you might be running in your game. And so you have instead of a guide to the other world, you have a plot that you can use and, fill in the details of the other world as you go, right? We've got the situation that your players are going to bump into, and 6 examples of that.
Yeah, and this could be, like Matt mentioned, it could be that your strangers are coming from Earth in the same time period, but it could be something even weirder, like a creepy mirror universe, like something from Mirror in Star Trek, or a lot of what Fringe was about. It could be
a world that's the opposite of the Shattered Isles, where everything's bright and there's lots of energy. Yes. And not ghosts.
Which is, I mean, you have a ton of options here, and we're all tired of multiverses. Me perhaps most of all, but what I do really like this sort of creepy parallel world where the idea that there are thin places and people can travel back and forth, and maybe they don't entirely know that they're doing it, and it's a lot more. I like it when it's more of a spy versus spy thing, or rather than a superhero traveling through portals type of thing. Again, watch Fringe, great show.
These pages here, I think, are the most useful in terms of examples of situations or NPCs that you could steal for a non-Blades in the Dark campaign, right? Because there's something really universal in having a parallel world, in that you can add it into almost any type of a role-playing game, right? Whether it's a far future cyberpunk thing, okay, they've found a portal to a parallel Earth, or a fantasy world, right, where there's another fantasy world where things are different. There's great suggestions on how to build plots around that fantasy world.
Do you want to talk about how the suggestions, the opportunities that are given? So each of the different types of crews, Harper has given a suggestion for scores and people you might interact with based on this part of the new fiction, based on the strangers and the fractures and the parallel world. And I think these are pretty cool.
Well, I think the one that was most interesting to me is the way to bring in the like empire, which is a great suggestion for, hey, someone wants you to kidnap a person who is a stranger, who is maybe plotting to take over the world in sort of a secret guild of people, secret family / guild of people who are all from the other world. And there's so many like ways you can spin this, and that like, maybe you should be on the side of the people who are coming in from the other world because your world sucks.
Yes,
but you know, maybe their plan for your world is even worse. So you can, kind of start the session with start planning this stuff, and you'll have plenty of time to decide. What do you want the stakes to be between, and your crew could end up working for the military and the immortal emperor, or actually working for these strangers from another world. Easily, I think this is the one from the Assassins one.
The one I liked a lot, and this is the first place that my mind went with, like the type of game that Blades is and the type of fun that I like to have is the Smugglers, where you can potentially end up opening and like running a smuggling operation between worlds, which to me just like sounds like the most hilariously entertaining thing to do with this particular information, right? Is like, okay, there's fractures between the worlds. How can we profit off of this? That is exactly
players will go straight there. They won't need any encouragement.
Yeah, they won't need any help. So that one seemed like a lot of fun to me. But yeah, Harper's given. And the thing is, these are tailored to each of the different types of crews, the Shadows, the Hawkers, the Bravos, whatever. But there's tons of information here that you can use for any type of heist. There's lots of information on NPCs. This is a really great section. I really like this a lot. It gives a ton to work with for just... it just reminds me how easy it is relatively to start and run a Blades in the Dark campaign, like how much less prep it takes than other systems. It's really great.
Everything builds on itself. If you go back to, and I guess we'll add link in the episode notes for this, our original 2-parter on Blades in the Dark, right? We've got wheels on wheels, and once you start turning one wheel, all the other gears in that finely tuned watch start turning, and the game kind of runs itself. Rob,
it does.
Are we ready to move on to systems?
Let's talk about systems.
So there's a lot of optional rules for reworking how harm and trauma and how downtime works. I want to talk about all these if we have time, but the one I want to talk about the most, so if you don't mind, maybe we can talk about it first, because I feel like it is the reworked threat roll.
I thought you would like this one, Matt. I
know
this one had no. It's good. I just I was like, Matt's gonna love this. Yeah,
and this is just a thing you can slap on to rework part of the actual mechanics of the game, and it's so brilliant because it works so well for so many Blades in the Dark or Forged in the Dark or Powered by the Apocalypse systems. But I think it's so universal in that it can work in any role playing game. And, one of the basic ideas that is part of reframing this system is an assumption that you can use this for whenever your players, I guess the D&D way to think about this is when your players are making a saving throw, okay, you're avoiding some kind of harm. You make a threat roll, you avoid the threat, maybe you partially avoid the threat, or you push yourself, you spend another one of your character resources to avoid it, or you take the consequences. But you can also use this threat roll for a situation that I think comes up about 80% of the time in 90% of the role-playing game systems which we play, which is you, as the director, as the game master, have a situation where the character should succeed. Like they're a rogue and they're good at lock picking. They're a gunslinger and they're good at shooting their gun at an enemy that they want to hit. You don't really want to have a roll where they miss. It's
Right.
just not interesting, and it negates the fiction of their character creation. However, there are some stakes here, and you want to have something happen that moves the plot. And you know, often you'll just say, yeah, you hit, yeah, you pick the lock. But sometimes you want to have a consequence. And the reframing of the threat roll is great in that it's not a question whether the player succeeds or fails. It's how much harm and complications they take. And this integrates with all the other Blades in the Dark mechanics.
Yeah, and Harper in his design notes section talks about everything that Matt was just talking about, and this was the most interesting thing, and it was illustrative. It was enlightening to me. You know, he mentions that some players get fatigued when, you know, new chances and problems are introduced every time they get a 4 or a 5 on an action roll. And depending on how often you roll, that happens a lot. It's also kind of fatiguing as a GM. I really like GMing Blades in the Dark, but one of the things you do have to do is continue to stay on top of complications and consequences. And either you need to have a good handle on that or be quick on your feet. And the threat system, I do think, smooths that out. I don't know if I would implement this universally in my Blades games. I like the original system a lot, but it absolutely is like a great tool, and it smooths out a lot of the problems that I remember I run into when I GM it.
For me, it just made me think about that maybe for all games I run, right, whether the system incorporates this or not, I really, when I want a player to roll the dice, I'm essentially breaking things down into 2 types of rolls, right? Which is there a chance you could fail? But, okay, that's fine. We'll roll to hit. And yeah, maybe we can have one of those systems where you suffer some consequences or gain an advantage or whatever added on to that. But I also want a type of roll where I'm assuming that you've already succeeded or failed, right? Mm-hmm. The D&D analogy is that you're caught in a fireball, right? You're already caught in the fireball. The mechanics of the game says it's a 20-foot radius from this point. Okay. The only roll is how, you know, badly do you get burned. But it can also be the opposite case. You know, you are sneaking past the guards. We know you're going to be silent. However, this is a desperate situation, to use a Blades in the Dark term. There are guards everywhere. What's the spiraling consequence that moves the story forward, right? You know, are you gaining an advantage in that you found a secret passage, or is an additional, you know, you're not spotted? That's not in question. There's no chance of failure here. However, but all of a sudden did another party of guards just arrive back from their shift and are now feasting in the main room that you have to get around.
I increasingly also like this a lot more. I'm less interested in success or failure, and I'd much rather have rolling be how well did you succeed, or what are the consequences, or what also happens, right? You know, how effective are you, rather than, you know, roll to actually see if it works or not.
Yeah, and the way this is laid out for you is it helps game masters who are, I think, a little frustrated with the fact that Blades in the Dark is constantly trying to get you to come up with new consequences after the roll on the spot. And so it reframes those where the consequences of a roll can be developed part of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Players, either the player involved or other players at the table, can be like, well, this happens. Or it can just be you lose a resource, right? You take some stress, or you have to push yourself, etc. And so that way everyone knows what's at stake when the roll is made. And this, again, this is my favorite systems module change, because to me, and I'm sure it won't feel like this to everyone who plays Blades in the Dark, but to me, it makes it feel more in line with the rest of the system, which has this broad ethos of everyone knows the stakes before the roll is made. Mm-hmm. And that helps us decide what resources we want to spend or not spend before we make the roll.
Yeah, this change is easier on both the GM and the player, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a really cool innovation. And Harper mentions this is how he runs his own games or closer to it, and it's always interesting to see how games iterate, right? And he's now been running this for years. He mentions in his design notes that he's been watching other people play. He watches actual plays, and he's incorporated that feedback and made changes, and I think that's really cool.
The other thing this one lets you do is have multiple consequences to a single roll. And this one's maybe more specifically to Blades in the Dark, Forged in the Dark games, which you play a little mini game of, I roll my dice pool, I got a 6, a 5, a 3, a 3, and a 1. Okay, which dice do I assign to which consequences? And the 6 to this one I avoid it entirely. The 5 to this one I have the partial effect. Okay, cool. Yeah,
which is just fun. I love assigning dice.
Yeah. No, I love dice pools. They're, obviously, lay all our cards on the table. Dice pools are by far my favorite type of system, and
Matt
a
and
new
I are
way to use
big on
dice
pools these days. Yeah,
we're pool heads.
We're pool pills.
You can call us pool boys.
Time to rename the podcast. It's Pool Boys.
Pool boys.
All right, let's talk about some of these other modules.
Which other ones do you want to hit on? Other system style modules.
Let's see. We can skip Harm. I like Harm a lot. The changes that he's made, but it's a subtle change to the original system. It makes it a little bit easier to run. And he mentions, I think it's because people forget to mark harm, and this makes it like a little bit different. I do want to talk about the trauma change too, because it highlighted something that I was getting wrong in my games. So Harper, when you fill up your stress boxes in OG Blades in the Dark, you mark trauma, and you get a trauma, and then your players or your PC is out. In this new system, you get a condition and you can invoke it, which is sort of like how the new harm works, which can be invoked by you or by the GM when it's relevant. One thing that Harper mentions this is the thing I was getting wrong, is that when you fill up all your stress boxes and you get a trauma, you're out for that scene. You're not out for the whole score, which, by the way, I went back and I read the original book, and I actually don't think that's very clear. So I'm glad he clarified that, but it is based on the original wording, not super obvious. So it's good to know, because that is much more forgiving than the way that I was running it. But I like this change too, because it makes the trauma more part of the fiction and a little bit less like of a dramatic hit to your player's effectiveness. I think this is a neat change.
Yeah, and this brings parts of Blades in the Dark in line with a kind of a sub-mechanic that a lot of people like, which is you have bad things happen to your character. However, those bad things that create complications for you are basically ways you generate some kind of in-game currency. In this particular system, XP, right, which everyone loves. Every player character loves. And, I love systems and subsystems that encourage players to lean into the flaws and problems with their characters.
Yeah.
And make them feel good about it.
Yeah. Blades has always been good about that with vices and all this, but this is just another thing to encourage your players to embrace their PC's flaws and mistakes and foibles and traumas. And yeah, it does a really good job of this. Let's talk about downtime, because I guess a little bit like the threat roll, this makes a big change. I like the old downtime system, but this is neat because it makes it diceless, which I love to roll dice, but I think that this is a good option and a good innovation for this game, because if you roll badly on downtime, it can be very frustrating in Blades in the Dark.
Yeah, I ran a game where it's like the players did everything really well, and they did a fucked up downtime roll.
Yeah, right.
It was just well, I mean, at one sense, it's well, that's the life of a scoundrel, but it's also, I don't know. I I prefer this new module by far, right? It's diceless. You tally up your scores and then you narrate through what can happen.
Yeah. I agree. I do think that like the original intent is, like, hey, you had a bad downtime. That's the life of a scoundrel. But I guess because you're only doing that one roll and it's kind of like the last thing or handful of rolls and it's like the last thing you do or the first thing you do, it's going to feel more frustrating than if you have a couple of bad rolls in a score. And so this downtime system, you just get numbers and you assign them and you narrate through like how you're dealing with that. I do think it's better. I do think it's a little to a lot better.
And, it's not like Blades in the Dark is a game where you're not rolling the dice. You are constantly rolling the dice whenever you're doing anything else. So having this one section where it's like, okay, we've already rolled the dice a million. I've taken 3 devil's bargains so far and all these trauma and harm and stress points. Okay, let's relax a little bit and figure out what all the heat and rep and coin we've got actually means. Yeah.
I guess this will lead into sort of like my final thoughts, which is I think like what's so cool about this book and like what's valuable both to a GM of Blades in the Dark, but also to anybody who's interested in running or designing their own games, is it shows Harper's design like evolution and like how he responded to and adjusted his game based on real world feedback and, actual like exposure to players. Reading it in a vacuum, the original Blades in the Dark book is great. It's still great. It is. But some things that seem good and smart in actual play ended up being frustrating. And this is a smart and good way to address that. I like that these are optional systems, but they are optional systems that I would probably use because I think they are based on real world data, I guess, for a lack of a better term.
Yeah. If I understand things correctly, like Blades in the Dark was a system that was designed through play of John Harper's home game, right? He was playing the game and then he was writing down, okay, this is actually cool enough that I need to write down all of these things where someone who's not me can run them.
Yeah.
And it's very logical that he would just continue doing that as he continues to play it and now also has this new avenue of watching other people play it through actual plays, continue to write down things that might work better for this system. And them all being optional as opposed to a new system is really great in that if you let me be clear, if you like your harm system, you can keep it.
That's right. Which I think is the perfect way to do this. I know that I have been called out for being inconsistent on this. So I know that I think that we said something different about how the DMG approaches this subject. But my problem with how the DMG does these optional systems is that the new DMG is not clear that they are optional systems. It just sort of like mentions them offhand. So that's my gripe with that, which is different from how John Harper does it in Deep Cuts.
No, that's absolutely correct, Rob. This is 2 sides of the same coin, right? One has clearly laid out like, hey, this will be the effect on your game if you make this change. This is why you might want to make it. This is why you might not want to make it. As opposed to design your own system, which right. Is we'll be back at it soon. But looking at the 2024 D&D system, it's clear that to a certain extent, it's not a game. It's a framework of which the dungeon master is expected to build a game.
Yeah,
and many people like that. Some other people don't.
All right. Any final thoughts on Deep Cuts? Suffice to say, this is great. This is really good. It's just $10. If you've ever played Blades in the Dark, you want to run it again, I could not recommend it more. If you're just curious about this stuff, it's also like a great $10.
Right. There's only 2 reasons to buy this, which is 1, you're running Blades in the Dark, or 2, you're really interested in how well-made game products can inspire your play regardless of system. And if you're either of those types of game masters, you should check it out. It's very short and very cheap.
Thanks for listening, everybody. If you have thoughts or questions, please do email us at dameofnone@gmail.com. You can, I keep saying this. I guess we still check it. You can add us on Twitter at Dame of None for now. X, the Everything app, for the time being.
Do we have a Blue Sky account, Rob?
I've actually been thinking about making one, but probably by the time this comes out, I will make us one.
You better make us a Blue Sky account before someone steals our name.
Yeah.
Rob. You're on there. And of course, if you want more episodes and more bonus content, you can head over to patreon.com/Dungeon Master of None. $5 a month, bonus episodes and homebrew stuff. Check it out if you want to.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and keep rolling them dice.